Joanne Rowling, known to the world as J.K. Rowling, was born in 1965 in Yate, England. Her childhood seemed ordinary from the outside. Her father worked in an aircraft factory and her mother was a science technician, but inside, Joanne carried an imagination that refused to rest. From a young age, she loved creating stories. At just 6 years old, she wrote about a rabbit who caught measles, and by 11, she had already crafted her first full story about 7 cursed diamonds. Books were her escape, her sanctuary, and her way of finding magic in an ordinary world. But life at home wasn't always easy. Her relationship with her father was distant, and her mother's health began to decline due to multiple sclerosis. Joanne often felt lonely, retreating deeper into the worlds she created in her head. Yet those difficulties gave her a resilience and empathy that later poured into her characters. At school, she wasn't a top student in every subject, but her teachers noticed her love for writing. She dreamed of becoming an author one day, though she kept that hope quietly tucked inside her heart. To many around her, it was just a childish fantasy. But for Joanne, storytelling was more than a hobby, it was a calling. Little did anyone know that this quiet girl, scribbling stories in notebooks, would one day create a magical universe that would inspire generations. Her journey, however, would not be easy. It would be marked with struggles, failures, and rejections that almost broke her spirit, but also shaped her destiny. After finishing school, Joanne went to the University of Exeter, where she studied French and classics. Though she was good at languages, her true love was always storytelling. She spent more time reading fantasy books than focusing on her academic path. After graduating, she moved to London and worked in various jobs, including as a researcher for Amnesty International. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept her going while she secretly held on to her dream of being a writer. One fateful day in 1990, as she sat on a delayed train from Manchester to London, her life changed forever. She didn't have a pen, nor paper, but an image came to her mind so vividly it almost felt real. A young boy with messy black hair, wearing glasses, who didn't yet know he was a wizard. That boy was Harry Potter. The idea arrived uninvited, like a gift, and Joanne couldn't shake it off. She later described it as a bolt of inspiration. From that moment, she began to shape the world around this boy, his school, his friends, his enemies, and even the rules of magic itself. She started writing whenever and wherever she could, in cafes, on scraps of paper, and late at night after work. It wasn't just a story anymore, it was a world unfolding in her imagination. But as her passion grew, life threw her unexpected challenges. Just months after her train ride, Joanne's mother passed away after a long illness. The grief was overwhelming. She had never shared the Harry Potter idea with her mother, and that regret weighed heavily on her. Yet, in her pain, she poured even more emotion into her writing, especially into the theme of loss, which would become central to Harry's journey. What began as a spark on a train was slowly turning into something powerful, but Joanne's trials were only beginning. After her mother's death, Joanne felt adrift. To escape her grief and find a fresh start, she accepted a job teaching English in Portugal. There, she thought she could build a stable life while continuing to write her book about Harry Potter. Portugal seemed like an adventure, a place far from the pain she had left behind in England. In Portugal, Joanne's life changed again. She met a journalist, and soon they married. In 1993, she gave birth to her daughter, Jessica. Becoming a mother filled her with love and hope, but her marriage quickly turned troubled. Within a short time, the relationship fell apart, leaving Joanne heartbroken and vulnerable. At just 28 years old, she returned to the UK with her infant daughter, carrying 2 suitcases, the manuscript of Harry Potter, and the weight of feeling like she had failed at life. Back in Scotland, Joanne found herself in one of the hardest periods of her life. She was unemployed, living on government welfare, and struggling with depression. At times, she felt like she had nothing left. The stigma of being a single mother with no money pressed heavily on her, and she often wondered if she would ever rise above it. Yet through all this darkness, there was one light that never went out: her story. She would sit in small cafes while her baby slept beside her, scribbling down chapters of Harry Potter. The cafe became her writing desk, the notebook her only tool, and her imagination the place where she could escape her pain. Rowling later admitted there were days when she felt she had failed on an epic scale. But those same days also gave her the determination to prove that failure wasn't the end. It could be the beginning. Life as a struggling single mother wasn't easy. Joanne often felt invisible to the world, someone people passed by without noticing. But she had a secret mission, one that kept her going when everything else felt impossible: finishing her book about a boy wizard who didn't yet know who he was. Day after day, she carried Jessica in her stroller, walked to small cafes in Edinburgh, and ordered a single cup of coffee that had to last for hours. With her daughter asleep beside her, she opened her notebook and wrote. The story poured out of her: Harry discovering he was a wizard, a magical school, friendships, and the battle between good and evil. In many ways, Harry's struggles mirrored her own: feeling lost, searching for belonging, and fighting through fear. But behind the pages, Joanne wrestled with her own battles. The loneliness, the judgment of others, the financial stress, it all piled up. She even admitted to having moments of despair where she questioned whether life was worth continuing. Yet every time she picked up her pen, she felt hope again. Writing wasn't just about creating a book anymore, it was about survival, about proving to herself that she still had purpose. By the time she finished the first draft of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, it was messy, handwritten, and full of corrections. But it was real. She had done what many only dream of: she had created a world from nothing. Holding the manuscript in her hands, she felt a spark of belief. It wasn't success yet, but it was the start of something extraordinary. Joanne had written her way through the storm. Now, the next challenge awaited: convincing the world that her story mattered. With her manuscript complete, Joanne Rowling faced a new mountain: getting published. She typed her story, packaged it neatly, and began sending it to publishing houses. Each time, she hoped someone would see the magic in Harry Potter. Each time, she faced silence or rejection. The first publisher declined. Then the second. Then the third. Rejections piled up, and with every letter that began with "We regret to inform you," her confidence cracked a little more. 12 publishers in total turned her away. Some said children's fantasy wouldn't sell. Others believed her book was too long, too strange, or simply not marketable. It seemed no one believed in her dream. For a single mother living on welfare, those rejections felt heavy. She sometimes wondered if she was chasing an impossible dream while her responsibilities demanded something more practical. But despite the sting of failure, Joanne refused to let go. She had lived with Harry, Hermione, and Ron for years. They were real to her. She couldn't abandon them just because the world didn't yet understand. Finally, a small London publishing house, Bloomsbury, agreed to take a chance, but even then, it wasn't easy. The chairman passed the first chapters to his 8-year-old daughter, who loved the story and begged to read more. That little girl's excitement convinced the publisher to take the risk. Even so, they warned Joanne she'd probably never make much money from children's books and advised her to find a real job. But Joanne had already survived poverty, heartbreak, and despair. A dozen doors had slammed shut before one opened. And with that single chance, She was about to change not only her own life but the lives of millions of readers around the world. In 1997, after years of rejection and struggle, Joanne Rowling finally saw her dream materialize. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was published by Bloomsbury in a small print run of just 500 copies, many of which went straight to libraries. It didn't seem like much, but for Joanne, it was everything. Holding that book in her hands, with her name printed on the cover, was proof that her persistence had paid off. At first, there was no sudden fame. Reviews trickled in slowly, but those who read it were enchanted. Children fell in love with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Teachers praised the creativity, and bookshops began to notice a growing demand. Soon, the story spread like wildfire, not because of marketing budgets or flashy campaigns, but because of word of mouth. Kids passed it to friends. Parents read it to their children. Teachers recommended it in classrooms. The magic was undeniable. Bloomsbury, surprised by the response, printed more copies. Awards followed. Suddenly, the book that wouldn't sell was winning recognition across the UK. Joanne, who once doubted she would ever climb out of poverty, was beginning to glimpse the light of success. Yet she remained humble, still raising her daughter, still scribbling notes for the next chapters of Harry's journey in cafes around Edinburgh. What made Harry Potter different wasn't just spells or castles, it was its heart. Themes of friendship, courage, loss, and love resonated deeply with readers of all ages. People saw themselves in the characters, and for Joanne, it was proof that her struggles had created something meaningful. The single mother who had once felt invisible was now beginning to be seen, and her story had only just begun to soar. After the quiet success of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in the UK, the story's magic crossed the Atlantic. In 1998, Scholastic, a major American publisher, bought the US rights in a heated auction. They paid an unprecedented $105,000 for a debut children's novel, a life-changing sum for Joanne, who just a year earlier had been living on welfare. In the United States, the book was retitled Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and soon, the world was talking about the boy wizard. The series quickly became more than just children's literature, it was a cultural phenomenon. Bookstores filled with kids lining up for midnight releases. Families read the books together. Teachers found that even reluctant readers were eager to dive into the adventures at Hogwarts. For Joanne, it was both surreal and overwhelming. Just a few years earlier, she had been invisible, scribbling in cafes. Now, her name was everywhere, her characters beloved by millions. But with success came new challenges. The press began to dig into her personal life, and she found the sudden fame difficult to manage. She was a writer at heart, not someone who craved the spotlight. Yet she carried on, determined to keep the focus on the books, not herself. Her second book, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, launched to even greater acclaim, followed by Prisoner of Azkaban. Each release only deepened the obsession. Children who had never loved reading were now staying up all night with a book in their hands. Joanne had not just written a story, she had created a generation of readers. What began as a single spark on a train ride was now becoming a worldwide blaze. And Joanne, once dismissed and doubted, was emerging as one of the most powerful storytellers of her time. By the early 2000s, the Harry Potter series was no longer just a set of children's books, it was a worldwide sensation. Each new release became an event. Bookstores filled with children dressed as wizards, waiting eagerly at midnight just to get their hands on the next chapter of Harry's story. Newspapers ran headlines about record-breaking sales. Adults and children alike were captivated, proving that Joanne's creation had crossed every age and cultural barrier. Then came the films. Warner Brothers acquired the rights to bring Harry Potter to the big screen, and in 2001, the first movie premiered. For Joanne, seeing her characters who had once lived only in her imagination come alive with real actors, sets, and magic was overwhelming. The film franchise exploded in popularity, cementing Harry Potter as not just a story but a cultural legacy. With this success came immense wealth. Joanne, who once struggled to afford a single cup of coffee, became one of the wealthiest women in Britain. But money was never her true reward. What mattered most was the connection she had created. Letters poured in from children who said Harry Potter had given them courage, from readers who had overcome loneliness or grief through her stories. Her words were healing people across the world, just as writing had once healed her. Still, Joanne remained grounded. She continued to write, carefully finishing the series she had once scribbled in cafes. Each book grew darker and deeper, reflecting not only Harry's growth but also Joanne's own journey through hardship to triumph. The girl who had once been rejected by 12 publishers had now built a universe that millions called their own. Yet her greatest lesson was not about magic spells or castles, it was about resilience, imagination, and never giving up on a dream. As the years passed, J.K. Rowling continued to deliver what readers around the world eagerly waited for, the next adventure of Harry Potter. With each book release, the excitement only grew larger. By the time Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire came out, the series had evolved from a set of popular children's novels into a global cultural event. Bookstores overflowed with fans waiting in long lines at midnight. Children who once hated reading were now staying up all night, lost in the pages. Parents and teachers, too, discovered themselves caught up in the world of Hogwarts. The series had truly united generations. But behind the scenes, Joanne carried an enormous weight. With millions of fans counting on her, the pressure was intense. She had to meet strict deadlines while also battling her own exhaustion and the constant glare of the media. Critics questioned whether she could keep the magic alive, but Joanne pressed forward with determination, knowing the ending had to be worthy of the journey. When she began writing Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Joanne understood it would be the closing chapter of a story she had nurtured for nearly 2 decades. It was an emotional process, like saying goodbye to family. She poured all her energy into giving readers closure, weaving together every thread she had introduced along the way. Finally, in July 2007, the 7th and final book was released. The response was unprecedented. Over 11 million copies sold within the first 24 hours, setting records across the globe. Readers laughed, cried, and mourned as the story reached its breathtaking conclusion. For Joanne, finishing the series was bittersweet. Harry, Hermione, Ron, these characters had carried her through her darkest days, and now she was letting them go. The end of Harry Potter was not the end of Joanne's story, but it marked the completion of a journey that had begun on a delayed train. A journey from invisibility to immortality. With the release of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows in 2007, J.K. Rowling closed the book on one of the greatest literary journeys of all time. But her story didn't end there, it was only the beginning of her legacy. From that moment on, Rowling was no longer just a writer, she was a symbol of resilience, imagination, and hope for millions worldwide. Her journey from a struggling single mother on welfare to one of the wealthiest and most influential authors in the world became a source of inspiration on its own. She proved that failure, rejection, and heartbreak were not the end but stepping stones toward something greater. Whenever she spoke in interviews, she reminded people that rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. Those words resonated with anyone who had ever felt broken. Rowling didn't stop with books. She gave back generously, donating millions to charities, especially those focused on multiple sclerosis, the illness that had taken her mother, literacy, and children in need. She also launched Pottermore and supported the expansion of the Harry Potter universe into stage plays, theme parks, and spin-offs like Fantastic Beasts. The magic continued, but now in new forms. Yet, perhaps her greatest gift was not the empire she built but the readers she inspired. Children who grew up with Harry Potter carried lessons of courage, loyalty, and love into their own lives. Many became writers, teachers, or dreamers themselves, passing on the flame of imagination she had lit. J.K. Rowling's story remains a living reminder that greatness often grows from the harshest struggles. She began with nothing but a pen, a notebook, and a dream, and from that, she created a world that will live forever. For anyone facing rejection or despair, her life whispers the same message: never stop believing in your story.